Okay, so this time you've really given us quite a collection, huh?
Yeah, this looks like a deep dive into solution-focused hypnotherapy training.
Looks like it, yeah.
Yeah, we seem to have the PowerPoint slides for the first training module, so
That seems like a pretty good place to start, to be honest.
yeah, definitely.
So our mission is really just to sort of go through these and extract some of the most insightful bits of information
Oh,
and give the listener a good grasp of what this SFH is all about and what this initial training involves.
absolutely. Yeah, think of us as your companions on this journey through the training material,
Yeah,
trying to
exactly.
pick out the bits that really matter
Yeah,
and connect the dots
right.
and give you that kind of intuitive feel for this approach.
So let's talk about where it comes from first.
Okay.
So these materials point to a guy called David Newton as being the founder of this SFH.
Right.
And what's interesting is it seems to pull from a lot of different places. So we've got analytical training, we've got CBT, which is a cognitive behavioral therapy,
Mm-hmm.
we've got NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming,
Yes.
and SFBT, which is solution-focused brief therapy.
Okay.
So it's sort of it's a very modern thing, really, isn't it?
Absolutely. A really interesting blend of different well-established therapeutic frameworks being brought together.
Yeah.
And that solution focus being a big part of that.
Yeah.
So.
And right off the bat, like in those very early slides, there's a question that really jumps out, and I think it's probably on a lot of people's minds when they hear about hypnosis.
Okay.
Can you be hypnotized to do anything against your will? And the training material flags this as a common misconception.
Right.
And it just seems like the perfect place to start to sort of like, dive straight into this material.
It's a great place to start, I think, because it gets at the heart of what hypnosis is,
Yeah.
but more importantly, what it is not.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a section called Hypnosis, Fact or Fiction,
Right.
and it gives us 5 statements to consider. So the first one is you can't be hypnotized to do anything against your will.
Right.
So based on what these materials are telling us, what are the real implications of that statement?
Well, I suppose the main implication is that hypnosis is a cooperative process.
Yeah.
It's not about someone else seizing control of your mind.
Yeah.
And it implies that even in a hypnotic state, you still maintain your own values, your own beliefs, your own capacity for choice,
Right.
which is important to distinguish it from some of the perhaps more, sort of sensationalized depictions that we might see in Hollywood movies and that sort of thing.
Right. It's not like some sort of Jedi mind trick or anything like that.
No, exactly.
Okay, so the next statement is a person under hypnosis is asleep or unconscious.
Right.
Now, that's another very prevalent image, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what does this training material have to tell us about that?
Well, it's pretty explicit
Yeah.
that it's not sleep.
Right.
It's a natural state of selective focused attention
Okay.
where the imagination is active and the intellect is subdued.
Right.
But the implication of that is that you are present, you are engaged,
Yeah.
just in a different mode of awareness.
Okay.
And importantly, materials emphasize that people are treated in hypnosis,
Right.
not with it.
Right. Okay, so you're not just sort of like completely zoned out.
No, you're not zoned out.
Oh, okay. And this next point sort of follows on from that.
Yeah.
I can't be hypnotized.
Okay.
Right. So I think a lot of people think they might be somehow resistant to it.
Right.
But the training material seems to be suggesting that hypnosis is 100% natural and normal.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. And it even says that it is one of the most fascinating phenomena of the human mind.
Yes, it does.
So it's suggesting that this is a capability that most people have
Yes.
rather than being something that's unusual or rare.
Yeah, I think that's the implication.
Yeah. Okay, so what about this one? You can get stuck in a trance forever. Now, that's a slightly unsettling thought.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So what does the training material have to say about that?
Well, because hypnosis is being understood as a focused state of attention,
Hmm?
as opposed to some kind of unconsciousness,
Yeah.
then the very idea of being stuck doesn't really make sense.
Right.
You can't be stuck in something that is a natural function of your own mind.
Okay. Well, that's good to know.
Yeah.
And the final statement they give us is, I won't remember anything the hypnotist says.
Okay.
Now, that's a concern if you're exploring this as a way to work through things.
Yeah, I can understand why that would be a concern.
Yeah.
I don't think the materials explicitly state that you will remember every single word.
Yeah.
But given that they're describing hypnosis as a state of focused attention,
Yeah.
I think it's implied that your memory function would be retained.
Right.
It's not like your intellect is completely switched off.
Okay.
So the implication is that your ability to process information and recall it would be intact.
Okay, so that kind of like clarifies a lot of the common anxieties that people have about hypnosis.
I think so, yeah.
Now, the training material quite quickly moves into a bit of neuroscience,
Right.
and that seems to be really fundamental to SFH.
Yeah, it certainly seems so.
So they mentioned this thing called mirroring happiness
Okay.
and this Hebbian theory.
Yeah.
Can you break that down for us and maybe give us a real-world example?
Okay, so I think mirroring happiness is referring to something that's a very common experience,
Yeah.
which is that we tend to mirror the emotions of other people.
Yeah.
If someone smiles at you,
Yeah.
you're more likely to smile back at them.
Right.
Now, Hebbian theory, sometimes summed up by the phrase, neurons that fire together wire together.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very, very fundamental concept in neuroscience.
Okay.
And essentially it means that when two brain cells are repeatedly active at the same time, the connections between them become stronger.
Right.
They actually grow stronger. And the material says it takes around 11 repetitions for new neural pathways to actually sort of really establish themselves,
That's interesting.
which gives us a sense of how much effort is required to actually change our thinking or behavior.
Right.
So you can think about something like learning a new skill.
Right.
The more you practice it, the stronger those neural pathways become.
Okay.
And it's the same with emotional responses, thought patterns.
Yeah.
So for example, if you were to practice gratitude regularly,
Okay.
over time, those neural pathways associated with feeling grateful would become stronger.
Right.
So, yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
They also mention some quite big names in the field of neuroscience.
They do, yes.
So they mentioned Louis Sokolov,
Yes.
Marcus Raich,
Yes.
and Hans Berger.
Mm-hmm.
So what is it about these particular individuals that makes them relevant to this SFH approach?
Well, I think it's important to see the scientific kind of credibility being established here.
Yeah.
So Louis Sokolov, his work on positron emission tomography, or PET scans,
Okay.
gave us incredible insights into how the brain actually uses energy
Mm-hmm.
and allowed us to see brain activity in real time.
Okay.
And Marcus Raich is famous for his discovery of the default mode network, or DMN,
Right.
which is essentially what your brain is doing when it's not focused on a specific task.
Okay.
So that's things like daydreaming, mind wandering,
Mm-hmm.
and as the slides suggest, a state that shares similarities with trance.
Right.
And then, of course, Hans Berger invented the EEG,
Right.
the electroencephalogram,
Yes.
which measures the electrical activity in the brain.
Yeah.
And that's been so crucial for understanding different brain states, including those associated with sleep and potentially hypnosis.
Okay, so they're setting out a really solid scientific foundation here.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the next thing they look at is how the brain works.
Okay.
And they introduce this model of the intellectual mind,
Yes.
the primitive or subconscious mind,
Mm-hmm.
and the anterior cingulate gyrus, which they've rather charmingly nicknamed the secretary.
Secretary, yes.
So can you give us a rundown of these different parts and the roles that the training material assigns to each of them?
Okay, so it's a simplified model of the brain,
Right.
but it's really useful, I think.
Okay.
So the intellectual mind is equated with the left prefrontal cortex,
Okay.
and it's presented as the boss.
Right.
It's where we do our conscious thinking, reasoning, decision-making.
Okay.
It's connected to the vast cerebral cortex,
Yeah.
which is responsible for all those higher-level cognitive functions that we have.
Okay.
And then we've got the primitive or subconscious mind,
Okay.
which includes key structures like the amygdala, the hippocampus,
Yeah.
and the hypothalamus.
Right.
So the amygdala's job is to process emotions,
Okay.
particularly fear and threat detection.
So it's kind of like the brain's early warning system.
Yeah, you could think of it like that.
Okay.
The hippocampus is essential for forming new memories.
Yeah.
And the hypothalamus regulates all those essential bodily functions.
Okay.
Body temperature, hunger, sleep cycles, all that kind of stuff. And then we've got the anterior cingulate gyrus, or the secretary.
Yeah.
And that acts as a kind of communication bridge or hub.
Okay.
It helps to connect and regulate the interactions between those other brain regions.
Right. So how do these different parts interact, particularly when we're under pressure or we find ourselves in a stressful situation?
Well, in any situation that the brain perceives as dangerous,
Right.
and that could be an actual immediate threat or something more abstract like a looming deadline,
Yeah.
the primitive mind can essentially take over.
Right.
And when that happens, it triggers that cascade of physiological responses that we often associate with stress and anxiety.
Yeah.
So things like sweating, rapid heartbeat,
Yeah.
churning stomach, clammy hands, all that kind of stuff.
Right. It's that fight or flight response.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. And they connect this takeover by the primitive mind to feelings of anxiety, depression, and anger.
Yeah, that's right.
Even going so far as to refer to it as a caveman reaction.
Yeah, the implication being that when we're operating from that more primitive state,
Yeah.
our reactions are very basic.
Yeah.
They're geared towards immediate survival.
Yeah.
And they might not be rational or particularly helpful for navigating the complexities of modern life.
Right. It's kind of like that knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah, okay.
And they say that in this state, the primitive brain is negative.
Yes.
Obsessive.
Yes.
Hypervigilant. And not very clever.
Not very clever.
At problem solving.
That's right.
So it's just trying to keep us safe.
Yeah, keep us safe from perceived threats.
Even if those threats are not necessarily real.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So that gives us a really good picture of this underlying brain science
Yeah.
that informs this SFH approach.
Yeah, it does.
So let's move on to how they actually apply this in practice.
Okay.
So they introduced this concept of sparkling moments.
Right.
What exactly are sparkling moments?
Well, it's an exercise in solution-focused practice.
Right.
And the idea is that individuals are asked to recall and describe specific instances when they felt at their best in a particular context. So, for example, at work.
Okay.
And then the crucial thing is that the questioner asks,
Yeah.
how come? What was it about that particular moment that made it sparkle?
Right.
So it's really encouraging a deliberate focus on what was positive, what was effective,
Yeah.
and what contributed to that feeling of well-being or success.
Okay.
So it shifts the attention away from problems
Right.
towards positive experiences.
So it's about focusing on what's working.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then there's a stage of spotting and naming resources.
Right.
So how does that build on the sparkling moments exercise?
Well, this follows directly on from that.
Yeah.
So the questioner listens carefully to what their partner has described,
Right.
and then they reflect back,
Yeah.
highlighting the individual's strengths, their
Sure.
qualities, their attitudes,
Yeah.
and things that clearly played a role in creating that positive experience.
Right.
So by naming these resources, it helps the individual become more aware of their own capabilities
Yeah.
and how they have successfully navigated situations in the past.
Okay, so it's about kind of like reminding yourself
Yeah.
of your strengths and the things that you can do.
Yeah, recognizing and reinforcing that internal toolkit for success.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So that seems to be a really central part of this SFH.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they define it as a modern neuroscience-based approach that focuses on positive change
Yes.
in a relatively short time frame.
Yeah, they explicitly say that the approach is strategically built on the foundations of solution-focused therapy, NLP,
Yeah.
brain-based explanations, and CBT.
Okay.
It's an integrative approach.
Right.
It's informed by evidence.
Yeah.
And the real key is that central focus on the client's desired future
Right.
and their goals,
Okay.
rather than getting stuck in a detailed history or analysis of the problem itself.
Yeah. So forward-looking.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they say SFH works in 3 distinct ways to bring out the best in people.
Yes.
And they list a number of specific issues that it can be helpful with.
Yes.
So what are those?
Well, this module doesn't go into great detail about those 3 ways,
Right.
but it does say that it can be effective in addressing specific phobias,
Okay.
supporting smoking cessation therapy, and helping with symptoms of anxiety and depression.
Okay. So quite a broad range.
Yeah, a broad range of applications,
Yeah.
which suggests it's versatile.
Right.
And while they don't go into detail about those 3 ways,
Yeah.
we can infer from what we've seen so far
Yeah.
that it's going to involve that focus on positive change,
Okay.
utilizing that state of focused attention in trance,
Yeah. Right.
and applying that neuroscientific understanding
Right.
to help shift those ingrained negative patterns.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And they also very briefly touch on the 3 ways of creating anxiety.
Yeah.
So according to the training material, what are
They say doing too much,
Okay.
drinking too much, and negative thinking.
Okay.
So it's a really practical perspective.
Yeah.
Very relatable, I think.
Yeah.
Because it highlights those key lifestyle factors and those internal cognitive patterns that can really impact our stress and anxiety levels.
Right. So it's a reminder that the things we do on a day-to-day basis and the way that we think has a direct impact on how we feel.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about trance.
Okay.
Now, within the context of SFH, the materials mention these things,
Right.
the 3Ps and rewards,
Yes.
EEGs,
Mm-hmm.
and inconsequential language.
Okay.
So what's the connection between all of those things?
Well, the mention of EEGs is, again, reinforcing that neuroscientific basis.
Right.
So EEGs are used to study the different brainwave patterns
Yeah.
associated with various states of consciousness, including trance.
Yeah.
And I think inconsequential language is referring to the kind of relaxed, non-directive, gently guiding language patterns that are often used to help someone enter a hypnotic state.
Right.
So it's about using language that doesn't trigger analytical thinking,
Right.
but encourages a shift towards that more imaginative, focused state.
Okay.
And the 3Ps and rewards,
Yeah.
which we know are positive thoughts, positive actions, and positive interactions.
Yeah.
Those seem to be linked to the positive outcomes and sense of well-being that can be experienced
Okay.
when someone is in that more resourceful state,
Okay.
which trance can facilitate.
So trance is kind of like the entry point.
Yeah, you could think of like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, they also introduce this stress bucket analogy,
Okay.
and they equate it with the hippocampus.
Right.
Can you explain that a little bit and how it connects to sleep patterns?
Yeah, so the stress bucket is a really helpful way to visualize how stress can accumulate in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And by equating it with the hippocampus, which is involved in memory and emotional processing,
Right.
they're giving us this mental image for our capacity to hold and process stress.
Okay.
So they list things like worry, thinking about negative future possibilities, which is known as negative forecasting,
Okay.
dwelling on past mistakes,
Mm-hmm.
or negative experiences, which is negative introspecting.
Right.
And those feelings of being overwhelmed or unable to cope
Yeah.
as things that are constantly filling up this bucket.
Right.
And then the crucial link to sleep is that they highlight the role of REM sleep
Yeah.
in processing our narrative memories
Okay.
and crucially stripping away the emotional charge associated with it.
Right.
And this process is key to emptying this stress bucket.
So if we're not getting enough good quality REM sleep,
Yeah.
does that mean our stress bucket is staying full?
Yes, exactly.
And does that affect how we react to things during the day?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
The level of stress in our bucket really influences how we perceive and react to daily events.
Right.
So if the bucket's overflowing,
Yeah.
even minor stressors can feel completely overwhelming.
Right. Okay.
They also touch on the difference between just the number of hours of sleep that you get
Right.
versus the quality and stages of that sleep.
Yeah.
So getting a few hours of fragmented sleep
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to a full night's sleep where you cycle through all the stages, including enough REM,
Yeah.
is going to have a big impact on how rested and resilient you feel.
Okay. So it's all about the quality of sleep.
Yeah, quality over quantity.
Right.
Yeah.
And the 3Ps, positive thoughts, positive actions, positive interactions,
Yes.
they present those as a way to actively empty this stress bucket.
That's right.
Okay, so what's the thinking behind that?
Well, engaging in positive thoughts,
Okay.
taking positive actions,
Mm-hmm.
and fostering positive interactions
Yeah.
is linked to the release of beneficial neurotransmitters
Okay.
like serotonin, noradrenaline, dopamine, and endorphins.
Right.
And those neurochemicals contribute to our sense of well-being.
Right.
And they play a really important role in managing stress
Okay.
and promoting that more positive emotional state.
Okay, so if we do those things,
Yeah.
it will help to empty the stress bucket.
Exactly.
Okay. They also briefly mentioned the 4 stages of sleep
Yes.
and the idea that during periods of anxiety and depression, the primitive mind is more in control,
yes.
whilst the intellectual mind is less engaged.
Right. So that reinforces that earlier point
Yeah.
about the primitive brain taking over
Yeah.
when we're under stress or experiencing emotional distress.
Right.
So by understanding the different stages of sleep,
Mhm.
including REM,
Yeah.
and recognizing how our dominant brain state can shift,
Yeah.
the SFH approach aims to help people regain that healthier balance
Okay.
between those more reactive, primitive aspects
Yeah.
and the more rational, thoughtful, intellectual aspects.
Okay, now finally we get a little bit of a peek into the practicalities of this training.
Right.
And what future practice might look like.
Oh.
So they outline this couch time session protocol.
Yes.
What are the key steps involved?
Well, couch time seems to be the practical application of the hypnotic element
Okay.
within an SFH session. So it starts with getting the client comfortable.
Yeah.
They say, hop on the couch.
Okay.
And then the use of inconsequential language to
Right.
ease them into that relaxed state without engaging their analytical mind.
Okay.
Um, Offering a blanket for comfort, dimming the lights, creating a more conducive atmosphere, playing calming music.
So just creating the right environment.
Yeah, setting the stage
Uh-huh.
for this focused state of attention.
And then are there any particular language patterns that they're teaching people to use?
Yeah, they outline a structured sequence.
Okay.
So it starts with your own opener to initiate the trance,
Right.
then suggestions to promote relaxation,
Okay.
evocative imagery.
Okay.
So things like picturing a stately home or a game player's planet,
Interesting.
incorporating a metaphor, maybe a village or trees,
Okay.
and then closing with your own personalized close
Right.
to gently bring them out of that focused state.
So it's quite a structured process.
Yeah, structured framework.
To take somebody into that place and then bring them back out again.
Exactly.
And then for the trainees themselves, there's homework.
Oh, yes.
So what sort of things are they being asked to do?
Well, its initial homework is really about getting prepared for practical application.
Okay.
So accessing the paperwork,
Right.
getting professional indemnity insurance, and DBS checks.
Okay.
Developing and deciding on your own opener and close for couch time.
Yay.
Aiming for 5 clients per week, and keeping a log of those sessions.
Okay.
Thoroughly reading the code of conduct,
Yeah.
and signing up to the CPHT website.
Right. So it's a mixture of admin and actually getting out there and doing it.
Yeah, exactly. A bit of both.
Okay. So we've gone really deep into this initial module.
Yeah, we have.
So what are the main takeaways for you?
Well, I think for me, the big ones are the emphasis on the neuroscientific basis,
Yeah.
the focus on the client's strengths and desired future, rather than dwelling on problems.
Right.
And that understanding of hypnosis as a natural state of focused attention.
Nope.
That can be used for positive change.
Right.
So it's a forward-looking, empowering approach that works with the brain's natural tendencies towards well-being.
Yeah.
And the initial training prioritizes a solid theoretical understanding
Yeah.
and the development of practical structured techniques.
Right. So you're getting both the theory and the practice.
Yeah, exactly.
And that question that we started with
Yeah.
about being hypnotized against your will,
Right.
I think it's safe to say the answer is a resounding no.
Yeah, a definite no.
Okay, so final thought for you, the listener.
Okay.
So considering this brain's natural negativity bias that we've talked about
Yeah.
and this concept of the stress bucket,
Right.
how might think consciously focusing on identifying your own sparkling moments
Okay.
and engaging in those 3 Ps,
Yeah.
positive thoughts, positive actions, and positive interactions,
Right.
how might that proactively influence your own well-being,
Yeah, it's a great question.
even without ever experiencing any formal hypnotherapy?
Yeah, think about the potential implications of those concepts
Mm-hmm.
for your own life.
And maybe even spark a curiosity to explore SFH further.
Definitely.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
See you next time.
See you later.